Today we're talking about two stations. One is Curzon Street, a station in Birmingham that's the terminus of a high-speed line from Euston in London. The line was intended to go further north, but was blocked due to political pressure. The other is Curzon Street, a station in Birmingham that's the terminus of a high-speed line from Euston in London. The line was intended to go further north, but was blocked due to political pressure. Let me explain. Last week, the chaps from High Speed 2 invited me to the start of construction on their new terminus at Birmingham. And yes, before anyone says it, I can see that the site has already been cleared and the approach viaducts are already under construction. This is just the official ceremonial type thing for the terminus itself. Look, when you get an invitation like this, you don't ask too many awkward questions, you know what I'm saying? I mean, it was a bunch of important news organisations, and also this one guy from YouTube. I'm not going to make too much of a fuss about it. Curzon Street is a new station, but it's built on the site of a very old one. In fact, the grand entrance to the original station survives, and I'm happy to report that it's Grade 1 listed, which puts it on a level with things like the Houses of Parliament and Buckingham Palace. In 1830, the Liverpool and Manchester Railway began operations. This railway was the brainchild of George Stephenson, and it was basically the first mainline railway. Stephenson saw the railway as more than a line between two cities. He envisaged an entire network across the country that could transport anything, anywhere. His son Robert followed in his footsteps and became, arguably, the greatest railway engineer of the era. Plenty of investors liked George Stephenson's vision. The Liverpool and Manchester Railway connected with the Grand Junction Railway, which was designed by George and also Joseph Locke. In 1837 that reached Birmingham. The next step was a railway to London, and construction on the London and Birmingham Railway was well underway. This was designed by Robert Stephenson. Curzon Street Station was to be the Birmingham station, and the original hope was that trains would be able to run straight through from the London and Birmingham line to the Grand Junction line. But local landowners blocked this. Instead, trains from both companies would terminate at Curzon Street and passengers would have to change trains. The railway was to be a grand affair. Classical architecture was the order of the day. Euston Station was the London terminus and was built with an enormous Doric propylaeum, or arch if you prefer. Curzon Street's entrance was no less impressive and incorporated the company headquarters. Both stations were designed by Philip Hardwick. They were a statement of intent. This was a new form of transport for a new era which was to revolutionise society. And the London and Birmingham Railway was sure to let you know that. Actually, Curzon Street was such a large and impressive station that it wasn't ready when the line opened. The first trains called at a temporary terminus at Vauxhall, which is now Duddeston. Trains began running into Curzon Street on the 17th of September 1838. Now those trains were primitive by modern standards, simple bar-framed locomotives hauling four-wheeled carriages. Third-class carriages were little better than open goods wagons. The journey of 112 miles took over 5 hours. Nevertheless, by the standards of the early Victorian era, this was high-speed rail. I should point out that in those early days the station wasn't called Curzon Street. It was just Birmingham. The station quickly expanded, extending as far as the canal, but it suffered the same problem that a lot of those early city centre stations suffered, which was that it just didn't have enough space. There were only 4 platforms, and with all trains having to terminate there, the lines into the station soon couldn't handle the volume of traffic. 2 new platforms were added after rearranging the buildings on site, but this could only be a temporary solution. In 1846, the London and Birmingham Railway, the Grand Junction Railway, and the Manchester and Birmingham Railway merged to form the London and North Western Railway. This was a big company that proudly described itself as the largest joint stock company in the world, and the Premier Line. Other railway companies had been looking enviously at the route to the north, and the LNWR's constituents certainly weren't going to let themselves be overtaken. A larger company meant more money and more power. The larger company felt that it was about time they got themselves a better Birmingham station, so they began working on one. In 1852, Birmingham was renamed Curzon Street, and in 1854 a new, even more central station was opened, called New Street. This was shared with the Midland Railway and allowed trains to run straight through to Liverpool, Manchester and many other destinations. But railway companies didn't like to throw things away. What usually happened when a city terminus was superseded was that the original would be turned over to some other use. And that's what happened to Curzon Street. It was retained as a goods depot until 1966, when it was closed down completely. The site was taken over by Royal Mail. Then, history began to repeat itself. In the early 21st century, serious thought started to be given to the concept of a dedicated high-speed rail route between London, Manchester and Leeds. Birmingham, being basically in the middle of the country, would be an important station on such a route. Several sites were considered for a station, including Moore Street, Snow Hill, New Street, Wolverhampton, Walsall, Heartlands, Birmingham International, Proof House, Faisley Street, Warwick Wharf, and an entirely new station. There was also another Curzon Street site mentioned, but I'm not clear how it would have differed from the one we actually got. The options were sifted through until they were reduced to Warwick Wharf and Faisley Street. Warwick Wharf was considered too disruptive to what was already there, so Faisley Street was chosen and renamed Curzon Street. The new Curzon Street is part of a major programme of development in this part of Birmingham. There were misgivings initially about the distance from here to the other main stations, but the West Midlands Metro is being extended to meet the new station, and it will of course be served by local buses. There are to be 7 platforms and a massive new overall roof. And as part of this development, the original entrance building is to be restored and strengthened. A thorough archaeological survey uncovered more remains of the original terminus, including the roundhouse, and a graveyard apparently. It's not a 19th century terminus without a little desecration. Of course, I can't really talk about this project without mentioning the fact that the line was intended to go on to Leeds and Manchester. But both of the northern legs have been cancelled, and as of 2023 the line is intended to terminate here. This is something that local politicians have expressed great opposition to, and they hope that the northern portion will eventually be reinstated. As for Curzon Street, the hope at present is that the new station will be open for business in 2030. I say new station, but in some ways it's one of the oldest stations. History do be like that sometimes. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video. I would like to thank my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon and here on YouTube for your generous support. You are the turntable to my roundhouse. I would also like to thank the chaps at HS2 for inviting me along, showing me around, and supplying me with documents explaining the history of the development of Curzon Street. I'll certainly be referring back to those in future videos. And I will see you all again very soon. Cheerio.